Welcome back to the SACATM meeting. We're going to start with session 4 on ICVAM public outreach and education. For session 4, we have 3 talks. Clarifying questions will be requested from SACATM members at the end of each of the talks. In addition, some SACATM members were asked to attend the 2025 public forum and a 2025 community of practice webinar. So there will also be some comments from SACATM members later in this session on those 2 public outreach opportunities. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Anna Lowett to talk about the ICVAM public forums.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but thanks for the opportunity to talk on a Friday afternoon to all of you about something that I've been pretty invested in for a while and really think is one of the best things we have on the ICVAM annual calendar. Many of you have heard me say on many occasions that the public forum is one of my favorite events. It's one of the only days of the year I can sit and listen and learn and not have to talk usually, which is really nice. So if you can just go to the next slide. So what I'm going to do, and just let everyone know that the views of this expressed in the presentation are those of my own and do not reflect those of the policies or views of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Next slide. Okay, so to go backwards a little bit more than a decade, which is hard to believe now, that in 2013, the NIEHS director at the time, Linda Birnbaum, put out a document in Environmental Health Perspectives that fundamentally reshaped ICVAM, really turned what ICVAM was doing, how it was set up, the products, the approach, the processes, really laid a new foundation for really reinventing the committee at the time. And that foundation and that vision has really led to so much success, including a lot of things you've heard yesterday and today, and are reflected in many things like our biannual report to Congress and how just really long and robust it is now. If you can compare the old one to what we do now, it's just incredible, the explosion of the work, not only in individual agencies, but across the collaborations across agencies. It really is grounded in the foundation of ICVAM and the purpose of ICVAM. But in relation to this session and thinking about giving us feedback on ICVAM and how we can improve and what we're doing on communicating with our stakeholders, one of the real foundational pieces that was in Dr. Birnbaum's reinvention document was to make our communications bidirectional. At the time, ICVAM would provide information to stakeholders, but there really wasn't a lot of opportunity or openness for the stakeholders to provide input to ICVAM. And the public forum was one of the first things we did in that time frame to begin to make it not only bidirectional, but hopefully more collaborative. Next slide. So on June 1st, not long after that document was released, we held our first public forum. And it was only a short half-day event at that point. The next couple of slides have some statistics on the evolution of the public forums across time. But so on that first one, it was a relatively simple agenda with just NICETM and ICVAM updates from a small number of agencies, and some general updates going on internationally on skin sensitization and the Tox 21 consortium. We did have a few public comments from animal welfare groups who continue today to be active in the space, and an audience of about 50 or so, which has certainly grown, including what you see on today. We're upwards and around well over 100. Close to 150. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so let's look across time. So I want to note the time schedule here is from that 2014 year, so that first one, up to 2024. And on the left graph, the axis on the is hours, just to sort of orient you. So that first year, the 2014, was a 3-hour program. And you can see over that decade, we've gone from a 3-hour program to 10 hours, which takes up a couple of days, correct? And you can see a steady increase over time with maybe a little blip down in 2018. But even over the COVID years, because of the interest in this space, the program continued to increase, which is good. And in 2022, the program became so long that we had to move it from a one-day event to a two-day event. So on the right side, you see the public forum presentations. There are two parts of this. The orange is the agencies presenting, and then the gray or the blue is the number of presentations. So although the number of agencies has made steady with some blips here and there, particularly in 2023, we had a lot of agencies that year. The number of presentations is increasing steadily, with some blips here and there, up to 2024, meaning that like EPA and FDA and NIH and some other organizations, for example, we're actually have in many years provided multiple presentations. And I'll show you example agenda in a few minutes that sort of shows that. Next slide. So the format. Over the COVID years, so 2020 to 2022, these meetings were completely virtual, as opposed to every other year we've held this has been hybrid. So if you look on the right side and sort of look closely at the registrations online versus in person. So the orange and the yellow are online attendance and online, the yellow and gray, excuse me. The yellow and gray is the online, and those bars are significantly higher in nearly every year over the in-person. And certainly this year is another example of that the majority of the attendees are online, with a relatively small and fairly constant number of people attending in person. So we did switch to 2 days in 2022 because of the number of agencies and numbers presenting, but the format itself has not has also changed. So we started that first year with just a 3-hour half-day meeting, and we've had years where we've done a 1 day. We've had at least 1 year where we did a day and a half of the public forum and used the other half day to do training on some of the SACATM computational tools. And then, of course, for a number of years, we've had a 2-day event because of the number of presentations. Next slide. So just so over time, in those first 2 or 3 years, agencies were only allowed 10-minute updates, which grew to 15-minute plus updates, or in some cases where different parts of individual agencies took up a whole 15 minutes. EPA, Department of Defense, and FDA have been fairly constant in their participation, and often have multiple parts of those organizations presenting. So at EPA, for example, the Pesticide Office, the Office of Research and Development, or the Toxics Office, in some years, all of those have participated, in some years, only one. FDA, similarly, you see CEDAR, CIFSAN, veterinary drugs, et cetera. And depending on the year and what they have to present on, it varies. We've also at some point added other things into the agenda. So we've added in summaries of the OECD ongoings in the guideline program. For a number of years, the national coordinator to the guideline program has presented. In some years, we've had presenters on updates going on at the Global Harmonized System relevant to implementing in vitro methods in the GHS categories. And of course, ICH is an important piece in the pharmaceutical arena in the guideline, and we have had presentations on that. And with respect to the TOX21 consortium, also you see across agendas a variety of topics ranging for sort of baseline overarching of what's happening, like what is TOX21, what's the goals, all the way to really in-depth presentations on specific aspects of it, depending on the year and whatever the new updates are. Next slide. So one of the really fun and unique things about the public forum is a number of our organizations, including EPA, have used that forum to just either announce new things or use it as a venue to talk to the public about things that may be new. So for example, the EFAM Strategic Roadmap is really still a wonderful document, and I would recommend everyone read it. If you've never looked at it, it's really a vision of how this enterprise of adopting NAMs works. We used the public forum in 2017, among other opportunities for people to give feedback on it. And that's still, in my mind, one of the fundamental documents in the space of adopting and implementing NAMs and regulatory for regulatory use. Actually, because of a lot of the feedback from not only the public, but SACATM, led to a 2021 publication on measuring progress in developing metrics for those agencies that can. It's been a common theme we've heard from many stakeholders in SACATM for many years, that it's difficult to understand the extent to which we're making progress if we're not measuring and providing metrics and providing those metrics transparently for people to see that progress. And that dialogue led to the 2021 publication, which was rolled out around the time of the public forum. In 2022, CPS made a big announcement on their guidance for animal use and alternatives. In 2024, EPA talked about the updates to the NAMS work plan, and NIH began to talk about complementary, which of course is really an exciting thing, which I'm sure many of you know about or have heard about. Okay, next slide. Okay, so public comments. As of course, part of public engagement is getting public comments. You know, if you look at the graph on the right, so the units here are the number of comments, just a tally of how many. Written comments, pretty steady. Oral presentations varies a bit by year, but across the trend, I think to say, you can loosely say we're getting more, maybe it's a little bit steady, but it's not that many. So even in the 2024, the number of public comments was 12, which was a lot for this meeting. However, 12 in the grand scheme of regulatory science and adopting new methods that fundamentally shift how we do regulation. 12 comments is not that many, because what that tells us, if you actually look into those comments, it's the bulk of those comments are from animal welfare groups who are invested in the science and the policymaking in this space. What has changed is that over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen more and more method developers providing comments, because it becomes a wonderful avenue for method developers to present to a broad audience of not only the federal agencies, but all of those other public stakeholders who happen to be online listening, which actually has led to the Method Developers Forum, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide. Okay, so I know the print is small. I have to put my glasses back on to see it myself. But so what we want to do is just sort of walk through one example agenda, because we really are genuinely interested in your feedback on how we're doing with this meeting, how we could do better moving forward, because public engagement is vital in our space to moving forward. Collaboration is vital in this space to moving forward. And, you know, taking a check on how we format these, how we're running them, what the agendas look like is really important. And this is why we're here in this session. So, you know, this is the agenda from 2023. And I think it's a reasonable representation of the last several years, certainly back to the COVID time, where so you see a meeting that's running loosely 2 days, kind of day and a half, 2 days, with a variety of topics in no particular order. So, as most of you know, I was the chair of ICFAM for 10 years. And so I gave the introduction. And so if you look from the top to the bottom on the left side, CPSC went first. John Gordon presented in that year. And then we had a couple of presentations from EPA. We had one from FDA at that point. But if you look to the right on the second day, we have a second presentation from FDA. So they're not necessarily back to back. And my guess is that we would have done that based on the availability of those presenters. But it is a bit discordant to have agencies on multiple days. So then you see OSHA, Department of Veterans Affairs, which is relatively new to ICFAM. Then we have our OECD updates and Department of Interior and NIST, NCI, NICETM, and then moving to the right side, the public comments were in the morning of that day, so sort of stuck in the middle, sandwiched in between the agency presentations. And so then you see USDA, FDA again, Department of Defense, and NCATS. So thinking about that agenda, it's first and foremost, it's packed. Each person is only allowed, approximately 15 minutes. And this agenda is packed of stuff. So point one. Point two, just the flow of how things go. There's no general theme. We allow the agencies to make their own decisions about what they want to present. And it is what they choose. We haven't necessarily picked themes to go through and focus on necessarily. What we've done is be more opportunistic and allow the agencies to talk about the things that they're being successful at. And the format of sort of, and this year we sandwiched the public comments in between the agencies. And, how is the flow of that? And is the logic of that, does that make sense? Is there a better way to do the public comments at the beginning, for example, or possibly at the end, or scattered across depending on the topic? I think there's really no right answer there. So there's a really good example of an agenda. If you looked across other ones, they would be shorter or longer. They would have maybe different agencies, but the flow is largely similar to this. Next slide. Okay, but one of the things that's really exciting about the public forum and why I've always enjoyed it is because meaningful tasks and outcomes have evolved from the public forum. Next slide. So the public forum is not just, I like to call the public forum the day where we do our show and tell. That we show and tell the wonderful and advanced, cool things that we're doing in our agencies, and we get to brag about how, all of those things. But it's really more than just a show and tell. It's really that engagement that we made that commitment to. And it's also important to recognize that some really important things have come out of the public forum. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, thinking about metrics and measuring and the transparency of those metrics, it's been a common theme for many stakeholders, but I'd say SACATM. And coming out of all that stakeholder engagement was the measuring U.S. success, which I talked about a couple of minutes ago. Next slide. And one of the really new and wonderful things that ICFAM is doing now that's really unique across the world is a Method Developers Forum. As more method developers have presented at the public forum, and more method developers are actively engaging with our individual agencies on presenting those methods to either whether it's just the committee itself or to individual agencies or researchers or regulators at all of those organizations, it's really become clear that there's a lot of methods out there. There's a lot of people developing methods, but we need an opportunity and a forum for those method developers to actively engage with the the members of ICFAM to find places where we can work together, find places where we can build synergies and move our space forward, where we can identify methods to either reorient them to be more regulatory relevant, or to begin to think about developing methods that we can build IATAs or even defined approaches out of. And everything I just described has actually been some of the outcomes of that first Method Developers Forum held last year or the year before. But the Method Developers Forum also is directly connected to several other things, right? So if you go back to the strategic roadmap, one of the important principles in that roadmap, and why it is in many ways really the visionary document that it is that it lays down a framework that says developers and end users have to work together. So if you remember that old baseball movie from when at least I was in high school about the dead guys in the cornfield, and there was that key line from that movie about if you build it, they will come, that really just doesn't work. If a method developer builds a method and doesn't engage with end users, whether it's the regulated community or the regulators, it's just not going to get used. We've seen that. There's so many examples. And so the interconnectivity of the roadmap and the comments we've gotten from method developers at the presentations from the public forum, things we've seen in our own agencies, for example, the work that FDA is doing in this space also. All of it intersects, right, leading to this really innovative thing, the Method Developers Forum. Next slide. Most of which I just said, I think. Okay, so I guess the last piece that's really come out of a lot of the engagement that we've had, not only through the committee and with stakeholders, is the updated validation document that was finalized and published early 2024 that really updates our methodologies from over the last decade or more. And connecting that to the public forum is so important, because if you think about the purpose of the forum, what we do at the public forum, and what we've learned from all those activities and engaging with the stakeholders, is that the methods that we were using back in the 90s and the processes to quote unquote validate or build confidence in methods to actually use them in our work. All of those things build from a decade of engaging with our stakeholders. Next slide. So in conclusion, so the public forum is really an important event. Not only is it just a fun day to sort of sit and listen and watch and see what other people are doing and get some new creative ideas, but it is a way that we are getting our information out, and we are getting information back from not only the public comments, but also engagements that occur with those stakeholders after the forum. When many stakeholders hear information, they often follow up with our agencies, and we build engagement that way. The format has changed and evolved. We went from a 3-hour meeting to 2-hour formats. It is heavily virtual with a small in-person participation, and we really feel like a lot of important things have been born out of the engagements that we have at the public forum. So with that, I'll stop and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lowett. Do any of the SACATM members have clarifying questions? I am not seeing any raised hands, so I think we will continue and move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Natalia Venus, and she's going to talk to us about communities of practice.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and following on Anna's presentation, I'm going to talk about another one of the engagements opportunities that we have going on. So we can move to the next slide, please. That should have a disclaimer. So this was a disclaimer, the same one that we saw earlier. This is my opinion and nothing to do with EPA. So. Yeah, why the communities of practice webinars were needed. So this, as I was mentioning earlier, Anna was talking about the public forum. We are now in the SACATM, and the third opportunity to engage is this communities of practice. It started in July 2014. EPA members proposed a webinar series that was following the idea of the Talks 21 communities of practice out of the EPA. And the thinking was that it was really useful to have like a high level overview of new technologies. And the important part was that there should be some emphasis on their potential for regulatory applications. A kind of a forward-thinking way of seeing these new technologies and putting some information out there and getting it out to the public and to other stakeholders. So the first community of practice webinar was in 2015, 10 years ago, and it was presented as a stream live event at the RTP EPA, right across the lake from where we're sitting right now. Beautiful place. And the title was Reverse Toxicokinetics Using In Vitro Data to Estimate Exposures That Could Be Associated with Adverse Effects in Vivo. We had two outstanding speakers. We had John Wambach from EPA and Barbara Wedmore from the Hamner Institutes. And there were over 250 viewers, which is it's quite impressive. We also have here as we were seeing in the earlier presentation, this gives us an idea of the people that registered and also who actually attended. And it's pretty consistent, except for a few years, things were a little different. But something that you can see this year, 2025, apparently there were no registration required, but the viewers were still pretty high. You see around 300, 400. So that's quite a lot of viewers. They really reach a lot of people and international, right? So they can be viewed from all over. So that is really good. I have all the topics here. I can just read them briefly. And you can see every year we had one, 2016, fundamentals of using QSARs. And I don't have to read the speakers, but you can see we had a really, really good people presenting every year, incorporating chemical information in 2017. 2018 was focused on machine learning and toxicology. 2019, non-animal approaches for inhalation toxicity. 2020, use of animal-free affinity reagents. So all of those are like really kind of cutting edge and areas where there's still a lot of needs to be explored. So they were very timely. 2021, non-animal approaches for mixtures. New approach methodologies to assess developmental neurotoxicity in 2022. In 2023, emerging approaches for anchoring biological relevance of NAMs. 2024, we had implementing computational approaches for regulatory safety assessments. 2025, evolution of complex in vitro models. So you can see all those, and I believe some of them you can actually go back and watch them. They're stored, are they? Yeah, so you can actually go back and look at those, which is pretty neat. It's similar to what we're hearing about the public forum. The goal is not really to just put out a really nice presentation out there only. So we want to get all this information out there as broadly as we can, but we really want to engage with the public. We want to engage with stakeholders. We want to make sure that it leads to something. And here we have a couple of examples of what happened, what activities came after this community of practice webinars. For example, in the one we were seeing earlier, the reverse toxicokinetics one, there were some follow-on activities. It was actually a webinar series, as well as a workshop on in vitro to in vivo extrapolation. We had 4 webinars from October 2015 to January 2016 that led to the informal workshop that was held in 2016. They had around 100 in-person attendees. And after that workshop, there was a workshop report published with all the outcomes and new ideas and guidance that you can see. It was published as a Bell et al. Paper in 2016, and you can find it out there too. So this is the kind of things that we really like to see, something that provides really good information, is timely, is relevant, is useful, and it leads to something even better. So another example of communities of practice that led to some follow-up activities is the 2016 QSAR models and read across. As a follow-up, we had concurrent and subsequent collaborations between NICETM and UNC. They produced predictive models for, you see here, skin sensitization, eye irritation, acute toxicity, developmental toxicity. These are things that are still really, we're still trying to push forward. We're trying to improve, but it's actually really impressive that those models are coming out and are very extremely useful. And they can be used to inform risk assessment when possible. So this is the kind of things that are really exciting and that we really like to see. Some other follow-on activities from communities of practice. We had in 2019, human relevant in vitro models. This was actually published as a case study by OECD. So we had this international acceptance effort, which is also pretty cool. And the data were used to support the risk assessment and the EPA. So this is these are all the slides I had. We just wanted to give you a sort of an overview of these things where we really think it's important. We have the SACATM, we had the public forum that Anna was talking about. We have these communities of practice. We really want to make sure they're used for public engagement, to engage stakeholders, to collaborate. And something that we wanted to stress as well is always really useful to get feedback and to get new ideas of what you guys think is useful. What can be for some new community of practice webinars? What would you think is, where do you like to see the field going? What do you think is missing? What can we do better? And where can we go? So any suggestions, feel free to send it our way and go back and see the community of the webinars that are in there if you haven't seen them yet, and really appreciate everybody's engagement. And that's all I had. Just wanted to thank the NICETM team for helping with all this, and everybody here and all of you online. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Venus. Does anyone from the SACATM group have a clarifying question? Not seeing any hands, so thank you. So the third presentation in this session will be on training and other engagements by Dr. Victoria Hall.
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Hall. I'm a senior bioinformatician at Innovative, where I work as a contractor supporting NICETM. Thank you to the SACATM Organizing Committee for the opportunity to speak about our many public outreach opportunities. And so my presentation is going to be focused on engagement in the past 2 years, but public outreach has always been a key part of NICETM's mission. And we engage in this through a wide range of trainings, workshops, webinars, demonstrations, and forums. And what keeps coming up over the past 2 days is that public outreach is essential for the development, acceptance, and evaluation of NAMs. And so there are many reasons why this is true, but just some of the ones that I would like to help or highlight, and what drives us when we go through our engagement is that ongoing education series build confidence in NAMs. We can't expect widespread regulatory acceptance or for the scientific community to be comfortable with new approach methodologies unless we are transparent about them and we work with the community to really ensure that they understand what we are doing and what we are developing. Engaging the community drives collaboration both within and outside of the public sector. Our tools are going to be stronger if we hear from the community that we expect to be using them. If people want to develop new approaches, they need to hear from us what works and what doesn't work. So those collaborations are an essential part of our engagement. Trainings also support ongoing efforts to democratize data and make complex computational models accessible. As NAMs get better, they often get more complex, and this is especially true for computational methods, which can seem like a black box to many people who aren't comfortable using high-powered computational models. And so we want to really make sure that our trainings make everybody comfortable with the different types of NAMs that are available, including some of these more complicated methods. And so in 2024 and 2025, NYCEDM supported and led many public outreach opportunities, as is evidenced by the timelines below. I'm going to go through some of these more in depth later, but I just want to highlight in 2024, we had a variety of ICE trainings to DTT, to NSF International, to the Open Talk Summer School, as well as an ICFAM Public Forum training session. We attended conferences like SOT and ASCCT, where we had demonstration booths and we led continuing education courses. We hosted and helped with the development of other webinars and forums like the Method Developers Forum and the Probabilistic Workshop. And we also had an epic webinar on the Sarah ICE model. In 2025, we also have been working to engage in the public. We had the SOT meeting this year, which looked a little bit different than maybe has in previous years, but we pushed for attendees to attend virtually where we could to lead continuing education courses. We had ASCCT award winners present at the ASCCT ESTIV webinar series. We gave ICE trainings to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and the FDA, as well as recently attending the 13th World Congress on Alternatives in Animal Use in the Life Sciences. And upcoming, we have trainings on Sarah ICE 2, NEURA, and OECD. And you'll notice that we have some blank space left. And so, of course, there are many changes upcoming and many opportunities for growth. So if you would like more trainings or if you would like to learn more about what we do, please reach out because we should have the time. And so now I'll talk a little bit more in depth about some of our different training opportunities and some of our different outreach. And I'll focus first on meetings, workshops, and webinars, where NYCEDM staff have been key supporters, participants, and organizers. And if you ever wish to read more about upcoming meetings or access materials from previous ones, please visit the NYCEDM webpage. QR code is given here, as well as the HTML. Our technical writer, Catherine Sprankle, and her team do a phenomenal job pulling together the materials from all of these meetings. And so the downside of going last as a meeting is that I'm going to be a little bit redundant with some of the things that have been discussed already, but let's talk about the Method Developers Forum first. So the Method Developers Forum, or the MDF series, is a proactive effort to highlight and implement the recommendations detailed within the 2024 ICFAM guidance document. And so this forum provides an opportunity for NAMS developers to present their methods and discuss regulatory issues with relevant stakeholders. And from a public outreach perspective, this really is a unique opportunity to bring together groups that maybe don't often get to talk to each other and communicate to each other, even though that communication is essential in the development of these approaches. And the first ICFAM Method Developers Forum was held virtually on August 21st and 2022 and 2024, with a focus on NAMs for carcinogenicity testing, and the next MDF will focus on cardiovascular toxicity. Another workshop that NYCEDM was key in supporting was the Advancing Quantitative Analysis and Human Health Assessment through Probabilistic Methods workshop in October 7th to the 8th. In 2024, EPA, in conjunction with NYCEDM, convened a workshop to facilitate the discussion of probabilistic methods and human health assessment. This workshop provided examples of applications of probabilistic methods and chemical risk assessments, highlighted ongoing research, and discussed the needs and challenges for the regular use of these methods. And in doing so, it helped to promote greater understanding of these probabilistic methods and guided discussion for how these methods may be implemented. So again, taking a concept that is inherently complicated, very varied, and trying to bring the community together to make it a little bit more accessible. And so for the rest of my talk, I will be focusing on trainings and training approaches that are undergone by NYCEDM. They are available across a wide variety of topics and formats, with each training updated and adapted for the audience. Training to us is a cyclical process in which audience feedback informs training materials and tool updates. And so we really don't want it to just be us preaching at our audience. We want to make sure that it is something in which we are openly communicating with each other. And so we build a repository of training materials that can look like slide decks or pre-recorded videos or training individuals alongside ourselves to make sure that there are multiple people available at a time. We then identify different outreach opportunities. Sometimes that's going to be our ICFAM partners communicating with us and coming to us and asking for trainings, but other times it's us seeking out different conferences or avenues through which we can give trainings. We then adapt our training format and contents to the audience at hand to make sure that it is as specific as possible. We execute those trainings and obtain feedback, and then we use that feedback to not only improve training materials in the future, but to help update tools and build collaborations. We've had examples of that with ICE, where we had at one of our trainings, people talk about how ChemQuest technology or terminologies were a little bit confusing. And so we went through our info boxes and really tried to highlight what is a Tanimoto score, what does a similarity score of 1 mean. So we really do try to take that feedback and use it moving forward. Some of our training topics include NICEDM tools like ICE, DASAP, ChemMaps, and Opera. We have computational methods that we train on, such as PVVK, IVIVE, and CATMOS, as well as some trainings on NAMs for general risk assessment. So there are 3 main formats through which we give our trainings. The first one I'll talk about are in-person trainings. Examples of that include an ICE presentation at the ICCS inaugural meeting last October, an ASCCT continuing education course on PVVK and IVIVE last October, and an ICE training at the NSF International Headquarters last summer. And so we really like these in-person trainings because we can have interactive elements like Q&As, hands-on demonstrations, cooperative activities that really help increase audience engagement. And in real time, you can see what's landing, what's not landing, and kind of adjust accordingly, which is a little bit more difficult with some of those virtual hybrid methods. And I will say this is the format for which we receive the most feedback from stakeholders typically. This is the one that drives the most collaboration, that really puts a name with the tool and allows us to do more going forward. And so while it can be a little bit more expensive and we know it's more difficult, oftentimes it is worth it. We do engage also in a lot of virtual trainings. We have examples like ICE demonstrations to FDA, MassDep, and Open Talks within the past few months. We had a continuing education course on IVIVE at SOT in 2025, which was supposed to be in person, but then was able to be a virtual course. So still getting the word out there, even though it looked a little bit different than we expected, and as well as SARA ICE demonstrations to OECD. And so these virtual formats are advantageous because they allowed us to access diverse audiences with minimal travel costs. These audiences are typically larger than in-person trainings because not only is it easier for us to give them, it's easier for people to attend them. So for example, FDA, we had upwards of 150 attendees at one point in time, which would be very difficult to do probably with an in-person training. And with all of our virtual trainings, if available, we try to have support staff available to answer questions live as they appear. So subject matter experts will often tune in, and if somebody has a question, we'll answer it ASAP. The third and final training format that I'll talk about are our demonstration booths, where we have booths at conferences like World Congress and SOT. These are typically for tools such as ICE, DASAP, SARA ICE, and HPPT, so where you can click on and really show users live what's happening. With these, audience members of varying backgrounds typically stop by for 5 to 10 minutes for demonstrations, often asking for an overview of the tools rather than any specific questions. And this one tends to be, I'll say, different for some of our other trainings because this is where you have users who have little to no knowledge of NICEDM tools like ICE or often even what NICEDM does as a whole. So this is where we get the most new engagement, the most, I'd say, from the very ground up, what is a NAM kind of questions. And if you ever want to learn more about upcoming trainings, demonstrations, or continuing education courses at scientific meetings, please visit our NICEDM webpage. And if you would ever like to request an ICE training, please contact the ICE support email. I will say, even if you would like a training in something that is not ICE, if we can't do it ourselves, we will try to connect you with the person who is the best able to coordinate that. And some other public engagement that I wanted to mention quickly. In 2024 and 2025, we did have visiting collaborators from EFSA, University of Seoul, and L'Oreal And for those, we're able to give like one-on-one demonstrations of ICE and different tools, including some of our tools and projects related to DART, PVK, IVIVE, and our curated high throughput screening pipeline. We also regularly monitor the ICE contact email to ensure all questions are answered. So if you ever have a question about our tools and there's not going to be an upcoming training or meeting, please email us. We try to get back to you as best as we can. We work with all of our subject matter experts to ensure that your questions are answered to the best of our ability. And our ICE tools have thorough user guides, help videos, and training slide decks. And while I highlight ICE here, this is true for all of our computational tools. We spend a lot of time working on documentation. Of course, there's always room for growth, and some of these have come up over the past few days, so we should acknowledge them. But one thing we could work on in the future is increasing the number of publicly available static training modules. So having more help videos or training slide decks that users can follow along as they engage with our tools. We should have more trainings targeted at early career scientists, students, and trainees. We really only get access to those, I would say, at our demonstration booths, although the Open Talk Summer School that was hosted by, training that was hosted by Swarni Krishnan did get at that a little bit, but could certainly be a growing effort for us. We should continue to improve case study demonstrations, ensuring that each audience understands how our tools may suit their specialized needs. We do try to ensure that our specific case studies fit the audience at hands, but sometimes there will be gaps, and they might tell us that our case study doesn't work, and that in turn may show some gaps in our tools that we can then identify and work on. And we should create new avenues for audience feedback so we can better learn what works, what does not work, and where the potential gaps are. And so to summarize, public outreach is a key part of ICFAM and NYSEDA's mission to promote the acceptance, development, and improvement of NAMs. In 2024 and 2025, there were a wide range of NYSEDAM-supported programs to both the public and the private sector, and this outreach spanned a variety of topics and experience levels. But of course, there's more we can do in terms of outreach materials, opportunities, and integration of feedback, and that's why I am excited about this session today, because I'm hoping to hear from SACATM members about where you think we could improve. And with that, I would like to thank the NYSEDAM group. I would say at some point, I think nearly all of us engage in public outreach to some extent. So if I listed us individually, it would take forever, but we appreciate all of them, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Hull. Are there any clarifying questions from SACATM members? So next on the agenda is oral public comments. So we have 4 requests to present oral comments. Please bear with me while I repeat expectations for this session. Presenters will be called upon in the order in which they appear on the slide. Please raise your hand to help AV locate you among the attendees. When called upon, please turn on your camera, introduce yourself, and give your affiliation. Then you may begin. You will have 5 minutes for public comments, and I will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining. And after your presentation, SACATM members will have the opportunity to ask for clarifying questions. So with that, I'd like to start with our first oral presenter, which is Sue Leary from Alternative Research and Development Foundation.
Hi, you can see me?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Marty, and all the folks there for giving us the opportunity to speak today. My name is Sue Leary, and I'm president of Alternatives Research and Development Foundation. I guess that I just want to say that I'm so grateful that Dr. Lowett went through a nice review of the many years of ICFAM public forums. They really were a wonderful innovation. We have participated, I think, every time. And it is wonderful to have the access for online, but I do encourage that ICFAM's meetings also include an in-person component. I feel like there's really no substitute for the interaction and stimulation of being there in person and being able to engage with all the folks present. And I think it also is very helpful for the members of the ICFAM member agencies to be present. The agencies should certainly make that a priority for them to be able to show what they're doing. It's always very impressive to see the investment that the agencies are putting into their work on alternatives. So I guess I just want to say I like the future directions that were discussed in the last presentation. Thank you very much for those. I do think that ICFEM just has such an important role to play here. Everyone's been talking about the importance of education and training, but ICFEM is the authority and trusted source, and I encourage an investment in continued expansion of training and education for the science community and the public in general. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leary. Does anyone from SACATM have a clarifying question? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much.
Okay.
The next presenter for public comments will be Dr. Dave Allen from International Collaboration on Cosmetic Safety.
Thanks. So, hey, I'm Dave Allen, Senior Director at the International Collaboration on Cosmetic Safety, or ICCS. Couldn't agree more with what Sue just said around how much I enjoyed the kind of trip down memory lane that was presented through some of those reflections. And I also was struck by many of those names that are, truly thought leaders in our field that have really gone on to continued to go on to do great things. So a really nice summary there. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to provide comments on this topic, and really thanks to Victoria for mentioning her really wonderful contribution to our inaugural stakeholder meeting last year. It's really great to have her there. So ICCS is a global not-for-profit initiative that includes cosmetic product and ingredient manufacturers, cosmetic and chemical trade, and research associations, as well as non-governmental organizations. We work to develop animal-free approaches that apply rapid, efficient, and informed safety decisions to be made, ensuring continuous innovation and protection of human and environmental health. We really believe that ICCS is uniquely positioned to provide a forum for collaborative work across government and industry to facilitate the scientific and technical steps that are necessary for the adoption of new approach methodologies and next-generation risk assessment frameworks. ICCS really empowers regulatory bodies, industry partners, and science institutions to adopt NAMs and NGRA by investing in training, technical guidance, and resource sharing. We've recently published the first in a series of best practice guidance documents that are being developed to support the global transition to animal-free safety science. Our BPGs, as we call them, offer a structured science-based workflow that includes really practical steps for problem formulation, exposure assessment, and data evaluation, all the way to allow transparent decision-making. It's especially suited for safety assessors that are experienced in traditional methods, but new to using NAMs. Our first BPG focused on skin sensitization was just published, and future iterations will cover things like skin and eye irritation, read across, and thresholds of toxicological concern. Through its scientific portfolio, workshops, and collaborative projects, ICCS strengthens institutional readiness and really builds those foundational capabilities and toolboxes that are needed for the successful implementation and long-term regulatory confidence. This includes efforts to fill gaps in the regulatory toxicology toolbox, amplifying existing resources through collaborations, and ultimately providing a repository of information on animal-free safety assessment. ICCS is proud to have recently partnered with NICEDM to characterize the landscape of animal-free approaches for systemic toxicity and understand the areas of systemic tox with greatest need and which present the best opportunities for human relevant model development, standardization, and implementation. We'll continue to seek to promote existing learning materials and fund the creation of new learning content to address gaps. We'll partner with existing training providers and continuing education organizations to deliver hands-on and virtual learning sessions designed to support safety assessors as they build their knowledge of animal-free approaches. In this way, ICCS will help ensure a more rapid and efficient transition to human and environmental safety assessment. In response to the ask for suggestions on improvement, I guess I'll repeat what Sue said. I think there's no substitute for in-person meetings that foster that networking, collaboration, and really novel thinking that simply doesn't happen in a virtual environment. I'd be lying probably if I said that I wasn't a little disappointed that this meeting didn't offer at least a hybrid option for those of us that are local or were able to travel and attend in person. Maybe to circumvent some of this, the ICFAM meetings can be aligned with other conferences and workshops at which many stakeholders will already be present. I know that travel approvals are often easier for some if there's multiple impactful meetings that will be involved.
1 minute remaining.
We applaud the extensive efforts with NICEDM and ICFAM to promote awareness and facilitate developing confidence in NAMs, just a few of which have been highlighted during this afternoon session. It's our hope that through education and training efforts, ICCS can be a collaborative partner with NICEDM and ICFAM to ensure that we help support widespread use of these new approaches for safety assessment. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Are there any clarifying questions from SACATM members? I am not seeing any raised hands, so thank you very much.
Thanks again.
So next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Catherine Groff from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals.
And for this opportunity to provide comments. I'd like to also reiterate the critical role that education and training has and is playing in achieving ICFAM's goals. Training opportunities, both for test method users and regulatory reviewers, as well as support from leadership for their staff to participate, to attend to these kind of opportunities is essential. Without this foundation, these innovative approaches discussed during today and yesterday during this meeting may not be fully realized, and only training can unlock this full potential of new approaches that can enhance regulatory decision-making. Science is evolving, not only in terms of new test methods, but also in how we understand and apply scientific approaches. For example, there was agreement yesterday on the importance of validating or qualifying the accuracy of methods against other reliable, valid approaches. And in particular, that animal data may not be a reliable reference standard. Since there's still a tendency to place an undue emphasis on a direct comparison to animal data, which delays the adoption of scientifically robust non-animal methods that may be more human relevant than the currently used test, education on this topic is critical, such as on ICFAM's report on validation, qualification, and regulatory acceptance of new methods, which provides this valuable framework for the consistent assessment of new approaches based on their fitness for purpose, based on their relevance to human biology, and based on their ability to reliably provide information that leads to health protective decisions. I'd say during this meeting, we've also heard strong support for international harmonization, standardization, data sharing, and other concepts that are essential to advanced science. Again, these concepts rely on education, training, coordination across industry sectors, across agencies and other stakeholders. The last thing I wanted to mention is that we have really valued the educational opportunities provided by the Communities of Practice webinars and the ICFAM Public Forum. And it was really nice to hear these historical summaries today. Like the previous two commenters, we encourage a return to hybrid format for the ICFAM Public Forum and for SACATM. In-person participation helps build connections across agencies and with other stakeholders, and it fosters collaborations. We also suggest adding a panel discussion to the public forum to make it more interactive and to give stakeholders a chance to engage more directly. And that is all I had. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Groff. Do any of the SACATM members have clarifying questions? I am not seeing any hands raised at this time, so thank you. The next oral public comments are from Naomi Haram-Lambakis from the Americans for Medical Progress. And we
Great.
can see you.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversations the last couple of days. My name is Naomi Haram-Lambakis. I am the Director of Communications and Science Policy at Americans for Medical Progress. If you're not familiar with us, we are a small nonprofit, if you can hit the next slide, whose mission is to keep medical advances moving ahead. And we do this through education and policy programs that help build awareness of the importance of investing in biomedical research to improve public health. And that's by strengthening communication with the public and policymakers about the people, the resources, and the tools that help make research possible, from animal studies to NAMs and how they work together. We're very, very grateful for SACATM and ICVAM for their leadership and their ability to bring so many stakeholders together for these critical bi-directional discussions. If you can move to the next slide. We have 3 recommendations for this meeting, 2 of which are specific to ICVAM and 1 that is more cross-cutting with the themes we've talked about the last 2 days. Recommendation 1 is the one that applies broadly, and that is to establish a standardized definition of NAMs. It's been acknowledged even today that the acronym has different meanings and definitions across federal agencies and stakeholders. And that's important because that inconsistency leads to misinterpretations and conflicting policy expectations. So there are some definitions that emphasize the methodology itself, non-animal models, novel alternative methods, and there are other definitions that emphasize the more broader research approach. And that's things like new approach methodologies, new approach methods. So at AMP, we strongly encourage SACATM and ICVAM to define NAMs as the latter one, new approach methodologies, because this definition more accurately captures the full scope of the scientific and ethical commitments of this work without oversimplifying their use. Moving more specifically to ICVAM's role on the next slide, our second recommendation is to ensure that ICVAM's expansion, as that gets underway, that there is a thoughtful consideration for including adequate expertise and resources for biomedical research. And this recommendation really stems from 2 recent policy documents from the FDA and NIH that both signal, and rightly so, the importance of ICVAM and leveraging its capabilities to accelerate research progress. And ICVAM's progress is advancing the toxicological space has truly been revolutionary. If you can hit the next slide. And it's been very, very exciting to see all that's happening in the toxicology space. However, it's very important to remember that those tools and those guidance documents for toxicology do not directly extend to all scientific areas. So if the scope broadens to biomedical research as a whole, we really encourage ICVAM to recognize the role of NAMs in animal models differs across scientific disciplines. The use of NAMs in neuroscience is not quite at the level of translatability power as NAMs in toxicology. Additionally, it's important to broaden the expertise and stakeholder engagement to include lab animal veterinarians, IACUC professionals, basic scientists, as well as translational researchers and end users. And coordinating closely with NIH OLAW will be helpful to ensure guidelines and policies align. And most important, ICVAM can be a true leader in this space, as it already is, that helps reinforce the complementary, not competitive, relationship between NAMs and animal studies. And that leads nicely into our final recommendation on the next slide, which is for ICVAM to provide clear communication and set realistic expectations for NAMs. It's really essential that advisory bodies like ICVAM and SACATM, that they provide the realistic perspective on the role and the utility and viability of NAMs in biomedical research. We cannot overpromise or oversimplify these technologies, especially if we are to be interfacing with the members of the public. So as part of that communication strategy, areas to keep in mind, especially when speaking with people without that technical scientific background, is where are animals still necessary for advancing science and protecting public health, the current limitations of NAMs in areas where further development is needed, and what this means from a practical standpoint in terms of public health and biomedical progress. And on the final slide, all in all, a key overarching goal is we should all strive for, through all stakeholders here listening, is to ensure that future research policies and the tools that we are using truly serve the science rather than defining it. So thank you for the opportunity again.
Thank you, Dr. Harlan Bacchus. Does anyone from SACATM have a clarifying question? I do not see any hands, so thank you very much. Appreciate it. So now I'd like to go into the SACATM discussion. We had several SACATM members who were asked to attend the public forum and the communities of practice meetings this year. Before moving to the lead discussions for session 4, I'd like to ask these SACATM members to briefly give their impressions of these meetings. So I'd like to start with Drs. Baines and Berg, who are going to talk about their impressions of the ICVAM public forum. So Dr. Baines.
So first of all, I want to say that I thought all the presentations were excellent. I'm very excited about all the communication that's going out to the public about NAMS. I think that's great. And I just have a few quick comments. Hey, sorry, thanks. Few quick comments. So one is, I think it's important to make sure that that we discuss NAMS at different institutions. So I know there's temptation just to focus on the Research One universities, the UNC Chapel Hills, the NC States. But I think it's important to make sure we focus on other institutions as well, that do research. So there's a lot of liberal arts universities. There's a lot of HBCUs, NC Central, for example, where I am. We have an animal care facility, so we definitely do animal research. And so we definitely want to make sure that that our graduate students and our postdocs and our faculty know about, the use of NAMS as well. So I think, just making sure that we just don't focus on the large research institutions, but to make sure that we go and give talks at graduate school seminars, any opportunity to again, the goal is to advertise and help the upcoming students and trainees to learn more about NAMS. And so I think it's important to make sure that we do that. So again, liberal arts universities, minority serving institutions, graduate programs in pharmacology, graduate programs in toxicology, graduate programs in biomedical, any biomedical research programs, cell biology. I think, it would be great to come in and give talks about NAMS to help students to understand that there's many different ways, different model systems to study diseases and study drugs and toxins and stuff. So I would say that. Also, I would say that I think it's important to make sure that we try to get the literature out on NAMS to the public in different avenues, and you're doing a great job. But I immediately thought of articles that articles like in Scientific American. So maybe have an article about NAMS in Scientific American if it hasn't been done already, for example. And then I also thought about textbooks. Different having conversations. When new textbooks come out about cell biology, these different biochemistry, these different textbooks. Make sure there's conversations where NAMS are being included. And so I think that's important as well. So again, I think what you all are doing is great. I totally also agree. I heard it earlier that in-person format dialogue and conversations are so important. I mean, virtual, I think there's definitely a space for virtual education, especially when you're trying to hit a large group of people. I think virtual Zooms, Teams work great, but I think in-person meetings always work better. Also, in terms of meetings, so I think you always go to different meetings. You're already doing that. You mentioned SOT and others, ACT. I was thinking about AACR, one of the American Association for Cancer Research, regional chapter meetings like NCSOT. So I know you go to SOT, but regional chapter meetings. Again, in any space where there's a group of scientists or students, I think would be ideal to consider. So again, great job. Those are just some thoughts I had in terms of how can we get more information about NAMS to the public setting.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Baines. Let's go to Dr. Berg. Do you have any impressions of the ICVAM Public Forum that you'd like to share from this year?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of comments, because due to the situation in the government, the meeting was much shorter than typical to me, but I thought it was very packed with examples that I think were very effective. There was a lot of news that came out, new things that came out from that meeting. It was a good opportunity to get that information out. So that's we saw some of the updates on this year at SACATM. I think there was more content, scientific content. It seemed at the as much at the public forum, and So that's I echo some of the comments by Antonio. So that's it.
Thank you. I'm going to take a little bit of chair's prerogative here and make a few comments on my impressions about the public forum as well. So similar to Dr. Berg, I would like to commend ICVAM and its participating member agencies for putting on a very robust meeting this year, even though there have been some pretty substantial changes in some of the research programs and some of the ICVAM member agencies. So I thought the forum was extremely well done. I had a couple of comments. There were great updates on many of the different NAM projects that are ongoing within the ICVAM member agencies. I wanted to comment on just a few of those. So NIEHS talked about an update on the developmental neurotox in vitro battery. They have been developing a lot of data to evaluate the utility of the battery. And so I want to applaud them for that. They've been adding a brain adipose PBK modeling element so that you can start to look at whether or not chemicals might partition in the developing brain. I would encourage them, because neurodevelopment continues into the postnatal period, to consider working on a lactational PBK model. So I'd like to bring that to the notice. NIEHS, there were some great presentations about TOX21 assays and how they were very foundational, but there's some limitations on the use of those assays. So, their physiological relevance when they don't integrate codependent pathways. And then there was a focus on liver and kidney models. And, typically with repeat dose toxicity, we oftentimes see effects on liver and kidney. They're two of the most commonly affected target organs. And really, there's been a lot of work, especially in the liver space. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when we thought HepG2 cells were really quite something. And now we're onto 3D models and microtissues and liver on a chip. So I thought the progress has been made is quite impressive. I would encourage some continued progress on kidney models. It was really great to see the renal proximal microtubuloid that was presented at the meeting, but being such a significant target organ, I would like to see some more work in that space. And then the last part I wanted to comment on was on the thyroid model that was demonstrated, the thyroid microtissue model. This is done using human thyrocytes, and so they self-assemble into these thyroid microtissues. And they pointed out rightly that, if users are going to take advantage of this model, that they could submit the data as part of other scientifically relevant information as part of an endocrine disruptor screening program assessment. But they brought up a very interesting point to me, which is there's a trade-off between trying to predict a range of human responses and the reproducibility of the assay. That being, because they're human thyrocytes, when you get a thyroid microtissue to work with, the responses of that microtissue might be reflective of the individual from whom that tissue was derived, or, versus, trying to really gather the range of responses. So in this case, they had taken cells from 32 individuals, and they used that to develop qualification criteria for the assay, minimum assay performance guidance, and set benchmark ranges for reference chemicals. And I thought that was a really amazing piece of work. And I would encourage others to think about, especially with these human models, how we can take into account the variability in human responses while still robustly understanding the reproducibility and predictiveness of those models. So that was all I wanted to share in that space. So now I'd like to move on to the Doctors Nanyas and Thompson Iritani to talk about their impressions of the community of practice meeting.
I'm not sure who's going first. Should I go ahead and start?
Go ahead.
Yes,
Go ahead.
please go ahead.
I'll go after.
Oh, okay. So I actually thought this was a spectacular meeting. First off, I just want to really give a lot of credit to the people who put this together. Elena and Callum, Camille, and Emily were excellent. So I really want to state that up front. I found the three speakers gave such spectacular perspectives on what they were working on. Dan Tagley from the NCATS had some really important things showing how these translation opportunities can be incorporated. And he has done some really spectacular work with some outreach efforts and some videos that he showed, both kind of how NPS works and how they can, where they're working in space and looking at these opportunities in microgravity, which I found really interesting. And I think they will be appealing to a broad audience. The next speaker, again, very interesting, talking about collaborative perspective of getting people to work together on these things. One of the interesting things that I found was he had kind of money that was given from NIH with the expectation that they would move towards a self-sustaining model, which they have done. Their membership and collaborations change pretty regularly, which I found interesting. He said it's $100,000 per year for membership, which is more affordable to some than others. And so looking at that perspective, I think could be supported further. And then the final speaker kind of talked from the farmer development perspective and a critical view of really these areas where we do not have any relevant models, and focusing our effort on those areas where there's really nothing and we need to develop something. And this is really an opportunity for some of these technologies to come to fruition. And very interesting. One of the most engaging things I found was the Q&A portion. There were some really hard, thoughtful questions asked, and there were some really hard, thoughtful answers to a lot of these things. And I think some of these were really just talking about what's the timeline for incorporation of progressing in this. And all of the speakers were asked what they felt about the timeline. They all agreed that probably, realistically, it's going to be further out than people want. Some people think that developing a timeline was not how we should be approaching this. We should just be working together to move things forward and not putting a timeline that would create anxiety, which I found interesting. A lot of the speakers were saying, animal research is still really necessary, and those focused on safety are going to do what they need to make sure that they put out a safe product, but they really want to invest in these new technologies. Need to be very careful about benchmarking and clear context of use definitions and those types of things. But I just think the Q&A was really valuable on this. And I think that if people haven't gone back and listened to that, it's really worth it to see the perspective of these people who are so invested in moving this forward, but really being realistic about it at the same time. So such a valuable thing. And I have to say, the recording and making it publicly available is equally valuable, because I watched it the first time, but I was able to go back and listen to the things a couple of times, and I caught something new each time. So I think continuing to make these available afterwards is really critical.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson-Iritani. I appreciate your observations. Next, we'll go to Dr. Nunez.
Yeah, I'll start off with the last comment on the availability of these resources. It was pretty impressive. So I actually was able to kind of go through and refresh my mind a little bit, pull them right up with a quick search. I was able to kind of pull up the most recent one that I was able to attend and kind of go through some of those slides. So I think, and this just isn't for this session, but for some of the things we talked about earlier, trying to figure out ways to advertise these spectacular resources, I think is something that's worthwhile. I get enough useless messages on LinkedIn. It would be nice to see some of this stuff in my feed so that I can kind of go back and see some of those things. So I think, just trying to figure out an approach for all of this wonderful stuff that we're building and trainings and different kinds of opportunities. How do we get the word out so the right people are looking? So with that, I'll kind of start backwards of how the agenda was. So I think it was really refreshing to see somebody from industry. Remy Villanueva gave an excellent talk kind of on his high-level overview of how we could use some of these things. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, you're coming through very well.
Perfect. And I thought it was just kind of an interesting way. So, actually going through some of the numbers of, how many of these submissions are conventional, NAMS augmented, and just NAMS only, I thought was, for me, kind of eye-opening. And then I love the way that he kind of put together some of the graphs and charts of saying, hey, look, in this situation, this could be accepted or not. I think one of the other key pieces is when we think about how these approaches are being used or where is kind of coming up with the idea of a scorecard and how do we keep score of how things are changing. So I really like when they talked about the BioSafe survey and kind of use those kinds of numbers. So for me, seeing changes in those types of numbers or those types of surveys, I think is going to be a good indicator as to whether or not these NAMs are being utilized more, replacing animals, or just being used for kind of the submissions. At the end of the day, there's still a lot of work to be done. Making sure that these things are accepted by the FDA and all the other regulatory agencies. So, I mean, that's completely understood. But I think it was a really good high-level overview of the complexities of what's going on and how we could begin to kind of approach that. So, with that, the other presentation that I'll probably talk about is Dr. Roosens from Texas A&M. This is, again, one of these presentations that was a lot of information and a humongous effort to do something like this. And the idea here is that, I'll put it simply, there's lots of tools that are out there, and lots of from companies, academia, you name it. The idea there is, are those tools useful, and what do we need to do to make them to have confidence in their utility in decision making. So he went on to kind of do something, really eloquent way of how they're working through his institution to kind of validate some of these things. And I won't kind of go through all of the details. It's available online in excruciating detail if you want to go through it. But I think at the end of the day, his conclusions were kind of where I've kind of been at, where a lot of these things aren't ready for, the real world. There is some value in being able to try some of these things before you buy. And I think there's still a lot of work that they're kind of trying to figure out on how to make this a little bit better process. But wonderful session. Again, for someone who's kind of in and out of this, just not on a daily basis. I think it was a really good way and a super useful resource for people to go back and look at this. And, seeing the ones that weren't 2024, I was sort of like, let me see. Some of those I think are applicable, going back to some of that data. So anyway, with that, I'll stop, see if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nunez. Appreciate your sharing with us. So what we'd like to do next is go on to the discussant questions for session 4. The discussants for this session are Sally Thompson-Iritani and Patricia Salvieri. I'd like to call on each of the discussants in order to discuss the 3 questions. Please recall that if the discussant prior to you has already made a comment, that you do not need to repeat that comment. Just say that you're in approval and agreement. And then afterwards, we'll open it up to other SACATM members who can also chime in on their impression. So the discussion questions are: what are some focal points to increase ICVAM's, NICEDM's engagement and outreach on NAMs? How might ICVAM improve public access and educational opportunities on NAMs? And which recent outreach efforts have been most effective in guiding ICVAM NICEDM activities? So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Sally Thompson-Iritani.
Thank you. I just had to find my unmute button. Sorry about that. So yeah, thank you so much. I want to make sure I keep these questions front and center. So focal points to increase engagement and outreach. I think there's a few things that I think we need to discuss here. As mentioned, right now making them available for anybody to call in is really essential. And that what I think needs to happen, and what I think some of our challenges are, is having more people that actually can feel like they're part of the conversations. And I don't know quite how we do that, because I do think there's a population of people who don't feel like they are a kind of a part of this group. And I think that is an opportunity, a missed opportunity, and a major gap that we need to see if we can fill. I think the venues, having them online are fine, or in-person meetings, whatever we can do to support further engagement. I think the attendance at some of the large conferences is really critical to support this all. And maybe there's an opportunity for expansion into other conference venues that we could talk about, like with Victoria. Fantastic all 3 presentations were fantastic, but Victoria mentioned some of the meetings that she's attended. And I do think there are some opportunities to extend that into some other areas, getting more engagement from people across different areas that ICVAM might be reaching out to going forward. As far as improving public access and educational opportunities, again, there are some really great resources out there. One of the challenges I think that people are dealing with is there is a lot of information overload right now. And so figuring out where to go for the best information is really critical. I think that is something we have to work on as a community, how we can provide public access and educational opportunities that are critical, and how do people know what is the most important and what to pay attention to. I think, as somebody had mentioned, ICFAN is a trusted resource. So making sure that people really know what it is doing and where it's available, and having some clarification on ICFAN's role going forward. I think a lot of people in the discovery science area don't see how ICFAN is going to be integrated with their work. And I think that's critical that we figure that out and make sure that people know what it is and how there are resources available to them. I think some of the recent outreach efforts, which have been most effective in guiding ICFAM and NICETM activities, a lot of it is people getting out there. I have seen more presentations, I've seen more visibility. And again, posting these things and making them available for people to go back to when they have questions. And I think some of the most effective ones have been really putting out these webinars and then making the transcripts available also, so that people have access to the information. I also just have to say, people making themselves accessible is critically important and been so valuable. I've been really impressed when I've reached out to people to talk to people. They've been very responsive, and it's been really helpful to have really good conversations. So I think that's my kind of answer to these three questions. I'll turn it over to my other colleague to maybe go more in depth. I have more I could say, but I think I'm just focusing on these questions right now. I'll leave it at that.
So Dr. Silveira, I'll let you go next.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to congratulate you on all the progress that you've made advancing NAMS and for your efforts in outreach and transparency. The first question, I think scientific society meetings will continue to be essential. For example, toxicology, pharmacology, and physiology meetings will be natural venues to reach both NAM developers and traditional researchers. But equally important would be to embed NAMs in graduate curriculum and training programs so that students begin to see them as part of their mainstream scientific toolkit. An important strategy would be to engage with accreditation bodies and professional organizations. If NAMs are reflected in accreditation standards for degree programs or continued education, universities and institutions will have strong incentives to integrate them systematically. And because NAM adoption is a global issue, international collaborations will continue to be key. On the second question, you show multiple tools today. However, I believe having a centralized, user-friendly NAM hub could be extremely valuable to nucleate all these tools. This place could provide up-to-date information on protocols, validation status, and regulatory acceptance. And if it is designed with both technical users and lay audiences in mind, it could serve scientists, regulators, and the public equally well. This will also be a perfect venue to share case studies and success stories, which would also help demonstrate the practical impact of NAMs. At the training level, I think online modules, webinars, and toolkits would support adoption across diverse institutions. And again, embedding NAMs in the basic science curriculum, not just as electives, but as a core content in toxicology, pharmacology, physiology, and biomedical sciences would normalize their use for the next generation. Finally, clear, accessible communication in the form of infographics, videos, and lay summaries would allow the public to engage more meaningfully in this transition. Now, on the last question about effective outreach, I see that the interactive workshops and the webinars have been very successful because they provide both technical training and opportunities for dialogue. I think stakeholder listening sessions are effective because they signal the responsiveness to the needs of academia, industry, and advocacy groups. And I think open access guidance, documents, and publications could be important for transparency and consistency, while outreach targeted at trainees, such as summer programs, specific fellowships, or even research competitions, could have a powerful cultural impact by preparing the next generation of scientists. Overall, I think you're on the right track, expanding outreach through accreditation bodies and curriculum integration, while continuing to strengthen public access and cross-disciplinary engagement will accelerate the adoption of NAMs. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other SACATM members who would like to comment on the discussion questions? Dr. Berg.
Hi, I agree with a point that as Sally made about the information overload. There's accelerated numbers of meetings, conferences, webinars, papers, trainings, and tools available to learn from. And I'm concerned about researchers being able to find and take advantage of these. So keep in mind, what can we do to curate, improve, and update materials, and also prioritize our efforts for impact. I liked what Patricia said about a centralized hub that would be ICVAM blessed materials, if you will. Secondly, I just want to make the point that how people learn is quickly changing as generative AI tools begin to add these study mode functionalities. So a lot of our products are going to be consumed by these systems. And so that's something we have to think about going forward to help our young researchers be able to learn all this material and learn the right information from the volumes of materials. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments from SACATM members? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm just going to do a quick summary on a few of the highlights that I heard today. I did really appreciate the kind of walk down memory lane for both the public forum and the communities of practice. And I think it's important that everyone remember that one of the goals of those presentations was to ask folks for feedback and ideas. So if you do have ways that you think that the ICVAM can better communicate with its stakeholders, that those ideas are welcome. Some of the things that I heard were that people really do appreciate in-person meetings when they can be held, but that really it's that engagement piece that seems to be especially valuable for people. So either adding panels or having Q&A available where folks can exchange ideas is really critical for the success of those meetings. I also heard that outreach to a broader array of stakeholders, that folks appreciate the trainings that have been given through ICVAM and having those materials recorded and online. So I think that's really valuable. And lastly, I really appreciate some of the ideas about focal outreach. I heard several people mention about academic training programs to help students actually learn in a more structured format about NAMs. And then the idea of a central hub for ICVAM materials where they can update materials that are ICVAM approved. So those are just a few of the things I heard from this session. So thank you everyone for your active participation. So this wraps up the discussion part of session 4. So now I'm going to turn it over to the chair, Dr. Wolf, to see if she has any announcements.
I just want to thank everyone for your active participation, especially to SACATM members, because this is out of your normal workday. You are giving us 2 days of dedicated time, and plus all the preparation that you did to be ready for this meeting. Also, thank you to the speakers, to the staff for help for setup, to ICVAM agencies for your attentiveness to listening to SACATM and their recommendations to you. As I mentioned, the slides, the recording, and the minutes will be posted to the website once they are either finalized or made accessible per government regulations. And I'll turn that back over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate many of the comments that that Mary just made, which are, I'd like to thank the SACATM members for their very active participation. I thought the exchange of ideas today was especially good. I'd like to thank the presenters for being very well organized and presenting a lot of very useful information. I learned a lot today in the presentations, and I appreciate you being very disciplined in the presentation of data and keeping with the timelines that were given to you. I also want to thank the folks here at NIEHS and all the folks who made arrangements for this meeting. I know a lot of work goes into trying to get this organized and get all the materials available online for everyone, and then even afterwards to do the recordings and get those up. So thanks for everyone to putting that effort together. As we heard today, a lot of folks do go online and listen to those recordings, so appreciate all of the hard work. And so with that, I'd like to find out if the chairs from NIEHS, ICFAM, or NICEDM, if they have any comments on day 2.
Hey, this is Helena Hogberg, Acting Director of NICEDM. Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you very much to all the really useful comments. I took a lot of notes, as I know many of my colleagues did as well, and we're going to definitely take this to heart and see how we can move forward and incorporate some of your suggestions, like we have done the previous years as well, which many of you commented on as well. So thank you. Thank you for taking your time, and thank you for continued collaborations.
This is Warren Casey. I want to reiterate the thanks to all the participants. One thing that came up a few times was NAMs and the definition of NAMs and how we're going forward with that. We are going to have to make some decisions and try to reach a somewhat universal definition at NIH, and we hope to be doing that soon. So stay tuned.
And this is Natalia, just adding congratulations and thanks to the whole team here at NIHS, NICEDM, all the agencies, SACATM, our chair. It's been great being here. It's a lot of fun always listening to all the talks and all the discussions and new ideas. So looking forward to the next steps, and thanks everybody for being there. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. I think with that, we can adjourn the meeting.